Kakadosh Boker Tov, we're continuing on Daf Yomi Amud Aleph 75a1. Okay, so says the Gemara, En Solin et the Pesach. We're talking about that you're not allowed to roast the Pesach, not on the Shipud or the Askela. Remember that the Shipud was a skewer or the Askela was a grill. Okay, and we're talking about Amar Rabbi Tzadok. There was a story with Rabbi Gamliel that he told Tevi, his servant, go and roast it on the grill. So here it sounds like it's a Maaseh story. If you remember, that's what we asked over there, which means it sounds like it's a story, right? Which is basically contradicting that which we just said. So says the Gemara, Maaseh store. Are you going to tell me that it's a Maaseh store? The story meaning the Mishnah just told you not to do it, and then 1 second later the Mishnah tells you, by the way, there was a story that he told the servant to do it. So says the Gemara, then you're right. The Mishnah is lacking part of it, and this is what it means to say. If right now the askela has holes, meaning if this grill, right, has holes in it, mutar, then you're allowed to roast it on top of it, even though it's going to be, how do you call it? It's going to be flat. Why? Because it had holes. So therefore you have to add in the word holes, and therefore it's going to be permitted. Okay? Fine. Says the Gemara, Ba mine Rav Chinana bar Idi min Rav Ada bar Ava. So Rav Chinana bar Idi comes and he asks from Rav Ada bar Ava. Yeah, and he asks like this: Tanur shisiko beklipe orla. When you have a tanur, which they put the tanur on, they have the tanur lit with klipe orla, which is basically different types of klipot of perot, like the peels of the fruits of orla. Now, usually orla, you're not allowed to have any hanab, you're not allowed to have any benefit from it. Ugrafo. Now you took out the gechalim, which means, remember, garu v'katum, just like we learned by Hilchot Shabbat. You took out the coals. Ve'afa bo et apad. Then you came and you heated up the bread with this heat. So everyone understood what happened. They used the heat of orla, which is prohibited, to heat up the oven. But then right after doing so, they took out the heat. So says the Gemara, right? Ledivrei haoser mahu. According to the one that says that if you have bread that was heated up in such an oven, what is the halacha with this oven? Because at the end of the day, they took out the coals and then they baked it. So when they took out the coals and then they baked it, yeah, so then what's halacha with this bread? So Amalei told him, hapat muteret. The bread is permitted. So Amalei comes and he tells him, Ve'amar Rav Chinana Saba, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rav Yochanan. Says Rav Chinana Saba, the name of Rav Asi, the name of Yochanan. Tanur shisiko grafo. When you have a tanur, which they put it up and then they made it, they took out the coals. V'tzalabu et Pesach, and then they went and they roasted it. Ends it sliesh. It's not considered sliesh. What does that mean? It's not considered sliesh. It's not considered that they roasted it in a fire. Shneimar, but it says in a pasuk, sliesh shte pe'amim. It says sliesh twice to teach you that the tzliat Pesach needs to do during the time when there's a fire in the oven. Meaning, if they took out the fire, even though it's still going to heat it up because there was a fire beforehand and they turned it off. That's like, just to give you an example. Nowadays, let's say I'm going to turn on the fire to 500, and then it got very, very hot. It was like that for an hour, and then I turned it off, and now I put something inside. It will still probably bake, right? I put it inside immediately when I turned it off. I turned it off, and then I put something inside. It'll still probably bake, but says the Gemara, it's not esh. Why? Because at the end of the day, you took away the fire.
So it's not the heat that is important, it's the esh.
It's the esh, exactly. Because by Korban Pesach, it says sli esh. I need the fire.
You can cook with both.
Exactly, but you need the fire. So Tamad degali rachmana tzli esh tepamim. So the reason why is because since the Torah says twice tzli esh, right? That's why. Halo gali rachmana. But if right now it did not tell it to us, so havamina. So I would have thought to say tzli eshu, that it's going to be considered tzli esh. Yeah, which means that in a case where they did do this, so therefore, since there's no extra, so I should prohibit it. Okay, so Amalei says the Gemara, Kali Rachmana Hatam Yalfina Mina. No, he says no. We learned it by Korban Pesach, the entire concept that if you have it, a tanun, which is garuf, is not considered a fire. So we learned from there the same halacha. We learn from there that that's also in other dinim in the Torah that's not considered a fire. We learn it from there. Okay, so we learn it from the Korban Pesach, that the second that you take out a fire, it's not considered a fire. Meaning the second that you took away the coals, which means that there's no fire anymore, it's not considered a fire. Yeah. No, but the steam cooking, there is a fire. There is a fire. It's just exactly the source of the fire. You're just cooking with the steam. Here, there's no fire at all. You took away the fire.
It's kind of
Okay.
vacuum of
Yeah, it's a vacuum, but it's not an actual fire anymore. Okay. V'bai tema for you can answer. Hatam over there by the Korban Pesach Tamad Ketav Rachman Atzli Shtei Pamim. It's written twice. Halo Ketav Rachman Atzli Shtei Pamim. If it was not written twice, Havamina, I would have thought to say Aesh Kapid Rachmana, that the Torah is makpid on the esh, on the fire. Va'afilu girafo nami tzli eshu, and even if you did it garu v'katum, also it's considered tzli esh. Aval hacha babayas ayetzim di isura kakapid rachmana. We are makpid on the wood of isur, valitino, but there's no wood anymore. Meaning, by the Korban Pesach, the entire yikar is fire. So okay, so we're makpid, there has to be a fire. Here has nothing to do with the fire. Here the Torah's makpid that you cannot use any wood, for any firewood, of orla, or of anything which is prohibited in benefiting. And here there's no wood of the orla because they took it out. Okay? Because they took it out. They took out the wood of the orla. Thank you. So says the Gemara, right? What happens is that here we are makpid on the wood, and therefore since there's no wood anymore, that's it, there's no problem. Fine. Tan Rabbanan. We learned in a braita. Chatacho untano al gabe gechalim. Yeah, imagine right now you cut it and then you put it on top of the coals. So imagine right now you cut the Korban Pesach and then you put it on top of the coals. Rebbe says, Ani, Rebbe Ani, shezet sliesh. This is considered sliesh, which means that even though you didn't put it on a mamash, on a burning thing, burning fire, but you put it on the coals, it's still considered the fire. Okay, so asks Rav Achtavoy Barami to Rav Chasta, Miyamar Remi, right? Rebbe, does Rebbe say Gechalim Eshninu? Does he say that Gechalim, right, are Esh, are fire? He said, I said Remi, right? I think Remi came from Rebbe. No? What do you say, Remi? Yeah, I think it comes from, Rebbe. So he says over here, Miyamar Rebbe, right? He says, does Rebbe say Gechalim Eshninu? Does he say that coals are considered mamash a fire? We have a contradiction. Michvat esh. It says when a person has a flesh and he has michvat esh, right? What does it mean, michvat esh? He has got to burn. Yeah, enli ela nichva be'esh. I only know if he was burnt by a fire. Nichva be'gachelet. What happens if he's burnt by a gachelet? A gachelet is the coals. Beremetz, or with efer roteach, is burning hot sand. Besid roteach, or burning hot lime. Begipsis. It's also a type of lime. Roteach, anything comes from the fire. Latuye comes to include chamea ur, even if it comes from like the hot springs of Tveria, or something that comes from the sun, right? Chamea ur comes from a fire, right? That means waters that were boiled up. Minayin tamulomar michva michva, which means that any single time that it says twice, you're adding in any other type of form as well. Tama de Rabbi Rechmana, it's only because it wrote it twice, michva michva. Halor Rabbi Rechmana, but if the Torah did not add it in, michva michva, gechalim lavesh, if not, then it's not considered a fire. So you see from here that if it wasn't for the fact that it was actually going to be written twice, the concept of michva, right? If it wasn't going to be written twice, we wouldn't have actually known it. So basically, the Gemara was asking that how could it be, says the Gemara, the fact that really be'emet gechalim, which are coals, is not considered real fire. And it's only considered in such a fashion when it's written twice, michva michva. So Amalei, so he comes and he answers, gachelet shel esh lo yitzikra lerebuye. A gachelet of wood we don't need to include. Yitzikra, when do we need to include it? Only in a gachelet shel matechet, which means if it's going to be coals of wood, we don't need to include it. But if it's coals of metal, that's when you need to include it. So says the Gemara, vegechalim shel matechet, what? If it comes of metal coals, that's not considered a fire? What about Bat Kohen? A daughter of a Kohen that she has immoral relations. The Torah says, Ba'esh tisaref, you have to burn her in a fire. The Amar of Matna says Rav Matna, Petila shelevara yosinla. They used to come and they used to get hot lead. Yeah, plum, right? They used to come and they used to make it they used to pour it inside of her mouth. So therefore you see from here that hot metal is considered a fire. So says the Gemara, which one? No, so we said that. We said that basically anytime that we were talking about all these different things, how do we know that it's also considered a problem? So he said it's considered michva. So since it says michva twice, so it includes all those other things. So then we said, so only because the Torah said it twice, michva, but if it didn't say it twice, so then it's not considered a fire. So how are you telling me gechalim is considered a fire? Here you see it's not considered a fire. So the Gemara answered, you're right. Gechalim of etz is considered a fire. Gechalim of matechet, of metal, that's not considered a fire. That's why you needed to add it in. So the Gemara asks, it's not considered a fire. What about the bat kohen that shezimta, the daughter of kohen that she has immoral relations, right? It is considered, right, a fire. So he says, shani hatam, it's different over there. The pasuk says, ba'esh tisaref. What does it mean tisaref? Lerabot kol srefot habaot min ha'esh. It comes to include anything which comes from a fire.
Would they compare the daughter of the Kohen with the food?
Because they're the daughter of a Kohen, they burn her. How do they burn her? They take metal, they melt it, and then they burn her with the metal. They pour it in her mouth. So you see from here that is considered a fire. So therefore, what are you telling me that metal is not considered a fire? Here you see metal is considered a fire. Yeah. So the Gemara answers no, but there it says Ba'esh tisaref. Tisaref comes from anything that comes from a fire also could burn her. Meaning really metal is not a fire. But since the metal came from a fire, that's why you're allowed to burn her with that metal, because it says Ba'esh tisaref. So says the Gemara, V'chol sheken b'esh be'atzma. So the more so in the fire in itself. V'nakifla chavilez zemurot v'nikla. So why don't we just say that we're talking about you have chavilez zemurot, right? V'nikla, and you burn it. So says the Gemara, Atya srefa srefa mibnei Aharon. We have srefa from the children of Aharon. What does that mean? The children of Aharon were also burnt. Yeah, so it says over here, Mala Halan, just like over there was Srefat Neshama V'gufo Kayam, which means that the Neshama was burnt, but the body actually stayed intact. So too here, we're talking about Srefat Neshama V'gufo Kayam. So too the Srefat Bat Kohen, what happens is that the body on the outside is still Kayam, it just burns the Neshama, because it goes inside and it burns the inside of her. Right? But the body itself on the outside is still okay. Yeah? So says the Gemara, V'na'avid la chamei ur. Right? Why don't we just make boiling hot water, right? Which is also comes from the fire, which that's called chamei ur. Chamei ur means chamim is hot water. So hot water that comes from the fire. So says the Gemara, Mishum Rav Nachman, because of Nachman. Rav Nachman says Rav Nachman Amarkat says in a pasuk, Ve'avta lecha kamocha bero lo mita yafa. You have to actually come and you have to love your friend. How do you love your friend? When you kill him, make sure you kill him a good death. Yeah? Which actually does make sense, which means that even if it is that you're going to have to kill someone, which means that even though he's a Rasha, that means he's a Rasha, you have to kill him. Still, he's Lireacha, he's still your Rea, he's still your friend. And therefore, the fact that he's still your friend, right, we're going to speak about this tonight in the Shiur of Chumash, who is called Re'ehu, who is called your friend. So therefore, even though he's a Rasha, he's still Rea, he's still your friend, that when you kill him, you have to kill him a nice death. Meaning, don't make him suffer. Don't say, you know what? No. Give him a good death. You understand? Very important. 100%. You're right. But he's still called the Rea. Okay? So he says over here, so 1 second. So if right now you have Rav Nachman, so why do you need srefa that you burn the bat kohen with this srefa? Just say it's a gzera shava that I already know. Right? Why? Because you have to be bororo mita yafe. You have to choose for him a very good death. So says the Gemara, Amri, we said, Ilav gzera shava. If there was no gzera shava, Havamina would have thought to say, Srefat neshama gufo kayam lav srefahi. That if you only burn the neshama, not the body, it's not considered burning. Right? V'imishum Rav Nachman. But now that I have Rav Nachman, nepush lechavelez zimunatula. Just add on a whole bunch of pieces of wood. Ki hechi ditamu ba'agala. So that way they should die earlier. Right? Remember, ba'agala means quickly. Ba'agala uvizman kari ve'imnu amen. Ba'agala means quickly. It's not an agala, a chariot, because that's in Hebrew. Ba'agala in Aramaic means quickly. Bimhera. Right? Ba'agala uvizman kari, in a very close time. So bimhera, quickly. Okay? Fine. So says the Gemara. Yeah, so he says, the Gemara, okay, Kamashmalan comes teach you that the Gezerah Shava is going to come and teach you that Srefa Neshama Gufo Kayam is considered a Srefa. So says the Gemara, Vela Be'esh Lamali. So why do I have the word Ba'esh? You have to burn the daughter of the Kohen Ba'esh in a fire. So he says, Lapuke Avar Mi Karo. to exclude the avar, which is the oferet, the plum, which is the lead, from the beginning. Okay, so Amale Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera says Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera v'choleicha dichtiv ba'esh tisaref l'rabot kol sefot b'mechamat ha'eshu. Says wow, whenever it's written ba'esh tisaref, it's coming to include, right, anything that comes from a fire. What about parima nisarafim? It's written there v'saraf oto ala etzim ba'esh. You have to burn it on wood on fire. The Tanya we learned ba'esh v'lo b'sidroteh. It has to be in a fire and not in anything else. So Amalei, so he comes and he says, Hachiyasha, can you compare both cases? Hatam ktiv ba'esh ve'achat tisaref. There it's written in the fire, and here it's written, just written, you have to burn it. So so anytime when it's written there, it comes to include anything which comes from a fire. Here it's written, only a fire, but nothing else. Okay? Fine. 1 second. So says the Gemara, basically what's happening now is that he says, Hatam Nami, also over there, it's written, right? Ketiva srefa levasof tichtiv. Right? It's written also srefa basof. What does that mean? Let's go back again. What is Rabbi Zera answering? Rabbi Zera is answering, Amalei hach yasha, can you compare both cases? There it's written ba'esh, and then it's written ba'esh, and then it's written tisaref. So it says in a fire, and then it's written you have to burn her. Okay, so the word tisaref that you have to burn is only written afterwards. So any type of a burning which comes from a fire is going to be okay. Here, it's written the opposite. Ba'esh, you have to burn them. The ba'esh is at the end, on the fire. Ulvasof esh, lemeimra to tell you, the esh in midechrin lo. So it depends what's written first. If it's written ba'esh, in a fire, and then it's written you have to burn, so then you could burn with anything which even comes from a fire. But if it tells you to burn in a fire, so only in a fire. If it's not in a fire, no. Capish? That's what it comes. So says the Gemara, Hatam Nami, also by Parima Nisrafim. It's written Srefa at the end. Tichtiv, we're on Ein Hamud Bet, 75b. Al Shefech Hadeshen, Yisaref. So since it's written Yisaref, right, also you know that it could be with anything. So he says, Amri Ahu Yisaref, Mibai Lelech Letanya. There he needs it for that which we learned in the Braita. Yisaref, Afal Pi Shen Sham Deshen, Yisaref, Afal Pi Shitzita Ur Berubo. So when it says the word Yisaref, it means that even though you don't have there any type of deshen, which is basically, again, the ashes, thank you, Sarisa, right? So when he has that, Yisaref, it's going to be burnt, even though the fire is in the majority of it, until it continues going until 100%, which means you have to make sure that it burns completely, and then it's going to be okay. Ravina comes and he says, Keroch, right? So he says, Keroch utani michvat esh. When we actually come, you have to put them together. What does it mean together, michvat esh? That's only if it's going to be in a fire or in coals. How do you know that you get burned with any other thing that it's going to be the same halacha? Remember, these are all different types of, whether it's lime, right, or all these other things also as well. Coals, lime, and all these things. So therefore, the word michva is coming, since it's written twice, it's coming to include everything. Okay? Rava comes and he asks the contradiction. Mi amar Rebbe, gechalim ikruesh? Are you going to tell me that gechalim are considered a fire? Or mean here we have a contradiction. Gachelet. Or gachale. What does it mean gachale? Yachol omemot. I would have thought that even if it's going to be already when it's turned off, that means gechalim that they already turned off, coals that are turned off. Talmud Lomar comes teach you esh. Esh, if it's going to be fire. Yachol, I would have thought to say also a shalhevet. Talmud Lomar gachale comes teach you also gachale. Hakitza, what are we talking about? Mevi mina lochashot. You're bringing from the ones which are still burning on the mizbeach. Gachale esh is the one which are gechalim lochashot. Right? That means they're still burning. That's what I mean lochashot. That means because they still make sounds to each other. Right? That's what it's like lochesh. You're whispering to each other, so it's still burning. You can still hear, right, the noise coming on. Okay, so says the Gemara, Gufa Kashya, that in itself is a question. Why? Amarta, you told me gachale. So yachol am omemot. I would have thought that if they're already turned off. Remember, there's gechalim omemot and gechalim lochashot. Lochashot means that you still hear them, meaning it's still on. And gechalim omemot means that it's dead. It's like it's off. It's turned off. Okay? So alma, so you see from here, lochashot eshninu, that if it's coals which are still on, it's still considered a fire. So let's see the seifa. If it's going to be a fire, yachol shalhevet, I would have thought to say it's a shalhevet. Gachale alma, fil lochashot lavesh. So you see from here, there's not going to be a fire, even though it's on. So Amar Rav Sheshet says Rav Sheshet, this is what we say. Gachale, Yachol, I would have thought say ben omo b'melochashot. Tamulomar esh comes to teach you the word esh. Esh, if it's going to be esh, Yachol shalhevet, I would have thought shalhevet and not the coals. Tamulomar gachale haketza. What is the case? Mavi mina lochashot. You have to bring it from the lochashot. You have to bring it from the ones which are going to be on the mizbeach, which you could still see it. You could still. So mikomakom nevertheless gechalim lo ikre esh. You see from here the gechalim are not considered a fire. So the coals are not considered a fire. So Kash Rebbe, so that's a question against Rebbe.
I was just going to say this because it cannot be possible that it's fire because one is heat and the other one is fire. So
exactly, this is not a fire. That's what we're trying to say. It's not considered a fire. So what is the answer? So the answer is Abai says Tari Tzachi. This is what you have to answer. Gachale Yachol omemot velo lechashot. I would have thought to say it's omemot and not lechashot. Tamulomar esh comes teach you an esh, a fire. Esh, if it's going to be a fire, Yachol Ratza Shalevet Yavi Ratza. So then you can bring whichever one you want. You can bring either flame or you can bring coals. Tamulomar gachale comes teach you the word gachale. Haketzad, you have to bring from the coals which are still on fire. I mean lechashot. Okay. So Amar Rava says Ratza gachelet yavi, Ratza shalhevet yavi. Says what? If you want, you can bring a gachelet, or if you want, you can bring a shalhevet. So he says shalhevet below gachelet. How are you going to find a shalhevet without gachelet? How do you find a flame without coals? Saying a fire needs something to be onto something, burning. You understand? So unless you're burning your hand when you have the flame, I'm saying the flame is on something. It's on a candle, it's on coals, but it has to be on something.
Yeah.
So he says, so answers the Gemara, he says, no, you put a utensil oil and then you lit a fire. So the fire is actually inside of the utensil, right? So why do I need a pasuk to exclude this? Right? So he says, one second, but so he says, what happened? He says, why do I need a pasuk to exclude this? To burn kodshim in such a fashion? He says, if in front of a king, a human being, you wouldn't do such a thing, in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, King of Kings, that's what you're going to do. It's written we have to burn kodshim in a certain manner. Now, if in front of a regular king, you're not going to burn it in this way. This is how you're going to burn it. So says the Gemara, Elamarava, but rather Rava says, Taditzachi, you have to answer like this. Gachale, I would have thought if it's already off and not on, Tamulomar esh. Esh, if it's going to be a fire. I would have thought if you could bring half of it a coal and half of it as a real fire. But when you're going to put it inside of it, so then the entire thing is going to be coals. From the beginning, it has to be burning hot coals. From the beginning. That's why it's going to be considered a fire. So we're going to ask a question, omemot with an aleph or omemot with an ayin. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says Rabbi Yitzchak, arazim lo amamu began Elohim. It has to be with an ayin. Right? But it says over here, afilu arzeh omemot. That means omemot with an ayin means that it's turned off. Okay, not with an aleph. Because remember, many times we are going to ask the question, is it with an ayin, with an aleph? So this is also where we see it, because it's with an ayin and not with an aleph. Okay? We're starting a new Mishnah. We'll just do the Mishnah, and tomorrow we'll continue from the Gemara. Okay? Which also tomorrow is going to be a long daf. Fine. So Bli Neder probably on Thursday night, right after Mincha, we'll probably do the daf of Friday Bli Neder, and then we'll continue from there. Let's see. Fine. Says the Mishnah, Naga becharso shel tanur. If a person comes and he touches, right, the Pesach, the basar, the Pesach, with the cheres of the tanur, with the earthenware of the tanur, with the clay of the tanur. So now basically what happens is if the Korban Pesach touches the side of the tanur, he has to be kolef. Kolef means he has to peel it, right? Like a klipa. So he has to peel it off, right? Wherever it touched. What happens if the rotiv of the Korban Pesach fell on top of the cheres of the earthenware and then it went and touched it again? So he told him, come on, now it's not enough kede klipa, now you need kede netila. Kede klipa is a thin peel, like an onion peel. Kede netila is like 2 centimeters. Okay, nataf, which means that you have to cut it and it has to stand by itself. Nataf notuvola solet. If right now it went the rotiv on top of a solet, on top of flour, so you have to do kmitza. You have to pick it up, right? And that's how you do kmitza, and you take it out. Okay, because again, it becomes prohibited. Okay, sacho b'shemen shel truma. Right? What happens right now if you took the shemen of truma and you went and you anointed someone? So if it's chavurat kohanim, yochelu, you could eat it. But if it's going to be a Yisrael, and Yisrael is not allowed to eat truma, im chayhu, right? If it's still raw, which means it wasn't still roasted, yedichenu. So then you just have to rinse it off, right? Why? Because it didn't absorb from the shemen. But if it's going to be roasted, you have to do klipa. Sacho b'shemen shel maaser sheni. If you did sicha with shemen, with oil of maaser sheni, lo yasenu damim al bnei chabura. You're not allowed to take the money from the bnei chabura. She'en mochri maaser sheni b'Yerushalayim, because you never sell maaser sheni b'Yerushalayim, which means like this. What is maaser sheni? Maaser sheni, right, is money which is supposed to go towards Eretz Yisrael. That means you take it to Eretz Yisrael and you buy food and you eat it there. Okay? Maaser Sheni is after Maaser Rishon. The first 10% you give to the Levi. And the Levi give 10% to that to the Kohen. It's called Trumat Maaser. The second 10% is Maaser Sheni in years 1, 2, 4, 5. And years 3 and 6, it's Maaser Ani. This year we're year 6 of Shemitah. So it's Maaser Ani this year. It goes to the poor people. But usually in 1, 2, 4, 5, in years 1, 2, 4, 5 of Shemitah, it's Maaser Sheni. What is Maaser Sheni? Let's say I live here and I have a farm. I get all my produce. After the second 10%, the first 10% that I give to the Levi, I take the second 10% and I take it up to Yerushalayim and I'm going to eat it in Yerushalayim, within the walls. Let's say I'm not going to take it to Yerushalayim because it's not going to stay fresh until there. I sell it. I have to add a fifth, and then I take that money to Yerushalayim, right? After selling it and taking it and adding a fifth, and now I buy food, and I'm able to party. I'm able to have shawarma. I'm able to have falafel. All these things, right? And I'm able to eat in Yerushalayim. That's what you're supposed to do. That's Maaser Sheni.
Enjoy for yourself.
Enjoy for yourself. Yes, for yourself. Right? But it has to be in Yerushalayim. So he says, however, this rule is only if it's going to be outside Yerushalayim. You cannot sell Maaser Sheni inside Yerushalayim. Because since you're already in Yerushalayim, it's a problem. So therefore he says over here it was a problem because since it's Maaser Sheni, you cannot sell it anymore. So since you can't sell it, you cannot add that into the, because you don't redeem it or you don't sell it, so therefore you can't do that. That means only Maaser Sheni is going to be sold outside of Yerushalayim, and then you bring it to Yerushalayim to eat it. But in Yerushalayim itself, you don't do that. Okay? So tomorrow again, we'll just do a quick chazara tomorrow morning on the Mishnah and the Gemara, Bezrat Hashem, okay?